George Kilpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation, celebrating people we feel good about. We have with us Chol Majok. He is a candidate for the 22nd Congressional District. There is a primary. Early voting starts today. And we are interviewing some of the candidates for that seat, those who reach out to us, and to find out what their issues are and what their platform is. Chol, you have obviously a very fascinating story about even your journey in America, and now you're seeking to represent the very district that took you in. Let's hear the background of your story for those who may not know. By the way, you're also on the Common Council. I should have said that too. You're already an elected official. What is it, 3rd District?
3rd District, yes, sir.
3rd District Council. Yeah, forget about that. And also, so yeah, Chol is a council for the 3rd District representing the city of Syracuse. But he said later for that, I'm ready to move on. No, I'm only kidding. He didn't say that. But he is interested in running for Congress. The primary date is August 23rd, but early voting starts the 13th, which is today when you're hearing this conversation. Okay, so having said all of that, Chol, tell us about your background for those who don't know.
So as a young guy, I was raised by a widower, man that had lost his wife early on, which is my mother. Lost her when I was 2 years old. So I was raised by my father, and my father was also a soldier. So I was raised in a household, full of service people. My dad, his brothers, his nephew, all had enlisted in the South Sudanese National Army. And so I was raised in that. And then along the way, as my father was raising me, the war came in actually prior to my birth. And as we grew up around our house, and my father continued to serve in the military, the South Sudanese government soldiers and the government army attack our villages, and probably have heard of the story of the Lost Boys. These were young men that were displaced by the war. I'm going to almost 30 years without seeing my folks as a result of being displaced and eventually becoming a refugee. And prior to that, I was raised in a very, very remote area and remote village in a rural area of South Sudan. We were farmers, specifically dairy, farming, and as well as grain and corn and peanuts, you name it. That was the life back then in a place where there was no electricity, no running water, no nearby clinics. Just living in a very, very remote area. So that's a little bit about me. So when the government soldiers start to push through our villages, start to burn down houses, tanks, military ships sailing through the Nile and bombing cattle camps, and pushing us out of our villages. Children running different direction and parents running different direction. That's how we became refugees. First became displaced people in our own country. Ran east, and majority of the other ran a little south.
So you're literally running for your life.
We were literally, and we were scattered. While we were dealing with that, George, Antonovs is one of the largest plane that Ukraine, I think, ever produced. And they stole a couple of those to the Sudan, and the Sudan government was using it against us to drop bomb above, ships in the sea, going through with shelling and killing people, and then tanks rolling through the villages. So it was no longer a life to live in, and a lot of us ran for our lives. And eventually, we gathered together as kids, few adults that were with us, made sure that we made it to places of displaced camp, and eventually we made it to northern Kenya, where I was there for 7 years prior to being resettled in America. as a refugee in early 2000. And then when I got here, George, I had no one here. So I was put through foster care system. And I lived in 2 homes here, and I was fortunate to have some of the best people on earth to be fostered by. And my first home where I lived for 4 years was right there on Cannon Street, 12 Cannon Street. Then my last year of foster care was in DeWitt for the last year of before I aged out. Then I aged out and almost became homeless. But prior to aging out, I went to Fowler High School and graduated from Fowler High School, went to Syracuse University, graduated with a bachelor's there. And then I continued, I went to SUNY Albany and did a master's in political science. And then that was not enough. So I went further and I did a doctorate in executive leadership. So that's my education background. And I got really interested in politics through my dad. I was inspired by my father, man that juggled the whole world and trying to raise children as well as a single father who was widowed early on. And George, what inspired me to want to be in public service was what my dad told us once in the village. My dad, as we were living in the village, he would come home and then go back to the front line. A war that eventually his brother that had enrolled in the service with him and his nephew all were killed, and he came back. As he came back, our story as a family was not unique, as so many villages there, women who were widows, men who so many men have been lost, mothers who have lost their sons, and children who have lost their dads. So a village was full of children without fathers because of the war, women without husbands because of the war, elderly mothers and fathers who have lost their son in the war. And as my father come back, George, there was a code in my village that my father understood. So when he come back from military service, before he even sits, George, he would take his military gear off and he would take his AK-47 and he would head to jungle. He's going to hunt for antelope. Our village, George, was known as a meat-eating village. So without men around, without a power in the village to really provide that, a lot of children went hungry. A lot of mothers went hungry. A lot of elderly went hungry. And my father, as one of the few men that was left in the village, George, would come back and head to the jungle. And when he come back, all the villages, whether children, widows, and elderly, will come to our house and make a line.
Because that's where the meat was.
That's where the meat was. And my father would give out every single piece of meat, almost at all times, leaving us with nothing. And one day, our father sat us down and he said, "Do you know why I do this?" And we say, "We don't know." And there's a culture where I came from, George, when an elderly person called, they would sit in like a stool and all of you will come and sit at their feet on the floor and you listen to them. And he was very precise. He said, "Do you know why I do this?" Say, "We don't know." And he said, "In this village, when you have a power to do something, it's not even an option. It's your responsibility to make sure that everyone in this village is taken care of. Because when widows, when elderly and children are okay, this village is okay." And he said, "Always remember that."
So why do you want to elevate from Syracuse Common Council to representing the 22nd Congressional District? So and what are the issues that you are passionate about?
Okay.
So let's start with why you're running. Why do you want to be?
So this is why I'm running. It's exactly what my father told me. He said, wherever you go, make sure you take care of people. And as somebody that war has deprived of that, I want to make Central New York a larger village. I see Central New York as a village that I grew up in. And in this village, children are not okay. Elderly are not okay. Everyone that is struggling, George, is not okay. And as somebody that was taught early on to take care of people, I can't sit by and watch our community deteriorate. I have a responsibility to take it higher. Now, as somebody, George, with that training and with that mindset and with the love and with empathy of people like that, I come with qualification, George. As I have highlighted earlier on, education-wise, no one in this race, in this candidacy, out of all four of us can raise their hand and say that they have better education than I am. No one. One. Also, representation, George, is constituent service. I have served under a Republican in Albany when I was in Albany. His name is Marty Golden. I was a staffer there. I moved back to Syracuse and I worked for Stephanie Minor for 4 years as a director of constituent service. Again, I moved on to Dave Valesky and I was a community liaison for Dave Valesky. And then I moved on to run for city council. I got elected. I'm serving my second term. Constituent service, George, has been my work. Apart from the nonprofit, apart from coming here as a refugee and cleaning toilets and vacuuming floors, apart from manufacturing, I've been to that area. All this experience, George, count for something. People want to be seen. People want to be heard. People want to be listened to. And they want to see themselves in their leaders. I'm running because the story I bring, majority of people in this district will see themselves through me as a leader because I have lived like them. And representation should be about how you have lived.
And so the district is Onondaga County, Madison County, and Oneida County, which is new.
Yes,
for
sir.
This, it's kind of used to be the other, it used to be going this way, now it's going that way. And part of the, you've got a broad constituency from urban to rural within that district. So let's talk about some of the issues. And let me go with one that just happened, where the Senate passed a sweeping legislation that included, Medicare, climate change, and such, and of course it's going to Congress. If you were in Congress, would you vote for it?
Of course. And here's where I'm really happy about this bill. Now let me get this straight, right? We are not there yet. We are not there yet, especially in regard to climate. We are not there yet. But let me say what I am really happy that came out of this bill. And that is the $27 billion that is going to be channeled to poor neighborhoods and to poor people. That to me is a plus. It's something we didn't have. Now, do we need more? Absolutely. But I'm as somebody that has been in public service for over 10 years, okay? As elected official, as a community, it is important that we learn to take small wins. Small wins are important. We take them and we pursue more. $27 billion, George, that is going to be channeled to poor neighborhoods. When you talk about,
go ahead. No.
When you talk about climate, you talk about providing funding to be able to help poor neighborhoods, get elevated. When I see that, George, as this money, these resources are coming to, my focus in this bill has passed now, my focus is to be able to channel so much resources in local community, because quite often poor communities where I came from, George, get left behind because so much is lacked, especially in education. Education, people are not aware, and we want to be able to make sure that people are aware of these resources.
Let me flip back to a local issue before I go back to the national issue. What was your take on the aquarium? Is it a good deal for the city, or is it something that should have been done a different way? So
in a community where we are number one in poverty in the nation, if
you won a ledge, would you have voted for it?
No. I would have not. I would have not, because when you look at the struggle that this community is going through, I couldn't vote for something like that. I could.
So how do you balance? This is a great point you're making, and I've said this. I thought that we need to be. We always say no to everything, and I guess it's a question of priorities. So how do you balance economic development in a community and deal with the poverty at the same time? In other words, can you have it both ways, or are we going to say no to everything that comes down the pike?
You know, George, everything is important, but not everything is a priority.
Oh, so you go back to priority.
Right? It's priority. Now, economic development in an area that you get 3 months, good 3 months for summer, and the rest of it is winter. I'm struggling as to why we prioritize something like aquarium over lack of affordable housing in the district, in a city where only less than 40% of people own homes. In a city, in a place where a major city is struggling with poverty, where close to 50% of our children are raised in a household where poverty is eroding. That to me is what I call mixed priorities. Okay, we got to get priorities straight. If we are to move this community forward to a point where we are doing stuff like aquarium, we got to make sure that affordable housing is there, where we stabilize families, so more can graduate high school and go to college or go to trade. We don't have that. When you look at the poverty that is happening, a lot of it has to do with lack of stability, George. Lack of stability, especially in housing, and to invest 85 million, and that $85 million is minimum, George. I would project at least $115 million
after it's all said and done. What you're saying.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what you're running on and why people you think should vote for you. What are your priorities?
I'm running on housing, affordable housing, George. As somebody that has been through foster care, as somebody that has lived through poverty, George, and as somebody that has grew up without parents, George, housing is such an important element if we are to challenge poverty. And if we are to give people a fighting chance, affordable housing give people stability and give children stability. My heart bleeds, George, when I see children in this community growing like this, because that's our future. And we are messing with it. That's personal to me.
So how do you think you'll influence that as someone, if you were elected, if you would get through the primary and then elected in the general election, how do you think you will make a difference in this area?
Well, as I always said, George, there's two areas: policy, lived experience. And best people that make policies are people who mix lived experience and policy, right? Advocacy, on the other hand, is lived experience. When I get to Congress, George, I want to make sure that my priority is clear. And that is, we need to invest in housing as Americans. There is empirical work out there, George, that as Americans, we have not made major investment in housing since the 90s. George, we are tearing more houses down than we build them. So relationship in terms of making sure that people talk to each other and making sure that people understand that people are first over politics, right? And when you look at this, George, lack of stability, poverty, when you look at a white person, when you look at a black person, when you look at Latino, when they are hungry, there's no hunger that is black.
Mm-hmm. Hunger is hunger.
Hunger is hunger.
I hear what you're saying there, and I think that's a great point, right? We got to look at people, but we know that disproportionately, Black and brown children are going to be hungrier. That's the statistics. That's a fact. So while we want to say all of that, we do have to recognize that there's a disparate impact on our communities.
And the question becomes why, George? The question is why? Well, there's an array of that. But here's one piece. There's one piece of that puzzle, right? One piece of puzzle is that as colored people, as low-income people, whether you're white, whether you're Black, whether you're rural, whether you're what, part of what really matters in here, George, is that people we elect are people without our lived experience, people that have not lived like us. We continue to elect them. If we are to challenge our circumstances, George, first thing we got to do is elect people that have lived like us. One. Number two is to make sure that we engage in the process, encouraging every poor person that have ever grown up poor to continue to challenge the process. I've been told, George, while I'm running here, Chol, you have no chance. And you know what I tell them, George? I tell them, yes, winning is not guaranteed, but you know what else is guaranteed? The fact that our condition, if we don't continue to challenge them, they are going to remain the same if we don't challenge them. If people who have lived like me and many others don't raise their hand and challenge the process, our condition are going to remain the same. And I, Chol Maok, have taken upon myself to challenge my condition and people that have lived like me.
So obviously crime, public safety are issues. What is your solution to the crime that we're seeing all across this country? Some of it pandemic fatigue, but what do you think needs to happen?
I go back to stabilizing housing and stabilizing families, George. I'm a father. I'm a father of 6 children. I have 2 sons and 4 daughters.
What's the age range?
I have 11 years old and a 3-month-old being the youngest, 11 being the oldest and 3-month-old being the youngest. I've been married to my wife for 12 years, okay? And I am so committed to making sure that my children make it. And their life, George, is different from mine because they have stability. They have a house to sleep in. They have a dad and a mother that take care of them, that is looking out for them. In order to fight crime, George, we gotta always think about stabilizing families. There is no other way to fight this crime. We can pour all the resources we want.
So how do we do that?
Stabilizing families.
How do we do it?
Making sure that they have stable housing to grow up, affordable housing, where families can raise children without having to worry of eviction, without having to worry of moving. The statistic out there, George, as I said earlier, kids that move from one place to place, George, have hard time graduating high school. And when they cannot graduate high school, George, what is their future? A very, very difficult future.
You have a number of different issues that you have on your website that you're for. You say you're about tax reform. You think New York is an overtax. Are you going to be able to reduce taxes as a Democrat?
So for me, George, I know that I have to be realistic, right? I have to be realistic that I'm going to Congress and there are other 334 people there, and then plus myself to make 435. My apologies, 435 people, including me, in Congress. Everyone has a constituent interest that they have to bring. Now, we got to start somewhere. And the fact that New York is overtaxed is out there. It's clear as it comes. Now, for me, going there is no certainties. There is no guarantees. But I'm going to fight for my people. I'm going to fight for my constituent. And part of fighting for them is to make sure that the nation knows that New York is overtaxed and we have to take care of our people.
But New York, New York being overtaxed, how do you influence that?
How do I influence that? Representation, George. And as I said earlier, when you have lived, how you have lived is translated into policies.
Mm-hmm.
And translating that into policies, George, start with advocacy and being aware of the problem.
So in the bill that you just, the congressional bill that was just released, there's some tax increases in that bill for certain, some of it having to do
15%, right?
15%. Right. Yeah.
Minimum.
So, and New York, we keep hearing that New York is overtaxed, but we don't hear so Republicans would say, elect us and we'll fix that. That's what they would say. How do you answer that?
Well, we have.
I don't believe that, but that's what they say.
We have elected a Republican. In fact, our current representative is a Republican, and they haven't fixed it. Right. So let's just get that out of the way.
Okay, let's do that right now. Okay,
let's just get that out of the way now. The taxes that you have seen raised in the current bills are being raised for people that can actually afford, who actually do not pay their fair share. And the tax being raised are being raised so that they can pay their taxes just like the rest of us, the rest of the struggling people who are paying their fair share.
So what can you do about jobs in this community?
Well, George, I came through workforce development. I used to direct until earlier this year. I was a director of workforce development in 6 community centers. Now, as somebody that have worked closely in the area of workforce development, there are a couple of things, George, that we gloss over, right? And that is soft skills, George. Soft skills is a major factor as to why people can maintain employment. Soft skills, okay?
Like,
because work, soft skills, how to greet, the attitude, the culture, being able to immerse yourself into a different culture other than the culture that you grow up in the street with. I had to do that. I had to get trained to switch, to have a code switch in my mind that the world I'm going in is different. Our people struggle with soft skills, George. And we always say, you know, this person can maintain a job. And part of that has to do with soft skills. Being able to train people with soft skills is one, right? Invest in people. One, people will say it's a handout. I don't believe it's a handout. I believe in investing in people, because without investment, I would not be here, George. That part of that is me going through foster care. That was investment. That's one. Number two is to make sure that trade, that people who want to do for themselves, people who are good with their hands, have opportunity to do that. Third, we want to make sure that we take care of the next generation. And that is what, there's a lot of people now, this generation, that are aging. And we don't have enough people to take care of those people. And as somebody that was brought up in an environment where you have to take care of your elderly people, it hurt me every day, George. It hurt me every day to see that nursing homes are running short of staff. We gotta make sure we invest in home care, okay? Train enough people, incentivize to help people get into nursing home and home care, so that they can continue to take care of our elderly. They have taken care of us, George. The least we could do is take care of them when they need us. So those are the 3 main things I think at this point. Doing that allow us to get there workforce wise. There are jobs, and we need to train people to be able to take those jobs and do. You are muted, George.
What do you think should happen with Brittany Griner, by the way?
Say that again.
What, the WNBA basketball player that was convicted in Russia, should we trade the arms dealer as had been discussed for her? Is that something you would encourage the president to do? It just occurred to me. What's the best diplomatic way we should get her home?
Well, George, as somebody that grew up around guns and grew up around violence, I support diplomacy over any sort of violence or guns or fight, right? And as an American, every American life is important. Every single life is important. And we must do everything to make sure that we bring our people home. Everything we can in our power.
If that means trading an arms dealer, that would be okay with you?
George, there is nothing more important than life. There is nothing. Nothing is more important than life. So if I was in that position to make that decision, I'll weigh my option carefully, but I will lean toward prioritizing that life is the sweetest thing in it compared to anything else.
Lastly, I wanted to talk about education. Republicans some of them want to abolish the Department of Education. How would you strengthen education in Congress?
Well, George, it is a common knowledge out there that America, as wonderful as we are, America is behind in education. America is behind. And when you look at especially college education, that's about 38% of Americans that hold bachelor's degree. To me, that's a fight we cannot let down. We have to increase chances for Americans to educate themselves. And I will not vote for anything that reduce education. Now, my proposal has been to increase chances for people to go to college. Pell Grant, Allow people to pay,
Should
Pell Grant,
student loan debt be canceled?
yes, 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 I am in debt. I've been to college. I'm in debt, right? And it wasn't by choice. I value education, and the only way I would get education is to get student loans, right? And you know what that does, George? As somebody that came here as a refugee, somebody that have no family wealth, you know what that does for me and millions of other Americans? It set us back. It set us back. It reduces our chances of investing, of being successful. It reduces our chances. And so I would support canceling student loan and making college affordable.
I know that there's been concern about the rights of two things, LGBTQ in our community, fears about not supporting marriage equality, not an issue for New York, but how will you help to make sure that that right stays for all in this country?
Well, I go back to lived experience, George, as somebody that had lived where my rights were taken away. Rights that were taken away to the point that I became a refugee because my rights were taken away. I am an ally for LGBTQIA plus community. We are in America. We are in a first world. No one should worry about their right being taken away. So getting to Congress, I'm going to be a fighter alongside LGBTQIA plus advocates. I'm going to be a partner because I know what it feels like to live with our rights.
And what are you hearing from people in the street? What are their major concerns?
They are worried that the next step is when for example, the abortion rights are gone. The next right are potentially LGBTQIA. The next right are right for people like me, people who came as refugees, people who are immigrant, people who are Black, people who are Latino, people, those are the next one. That's the fear, George. That's the fear. And it is a legitimate concern.
And can they count on you to support those things?
Absolutely. There is no one that is going to fight harder than me.
How many languages do you speak?
So I've been here 20 years. Then some of the language that I haven't spoken, I start to evaporate. When I came to this country, I was fluent in Kiswahili. I was fluent in Arabic. I was fluent in another language called Turkana. And then obviously my first language, which is Dinka, and then English, so 5.
Mm-hmm. So right now, are you down to how many?
So I still got a little bit of all.
Okay.
I still got a little bit of all.
Like you can get through it. You can get through it, huh?
I can get through it, but the language that is still 150% is Dinka, which is my mother tongue.
Mother tongue.
Yeah.
All right, Chol Maok. He is running for the 22nd congressional seat. Primary day is April 23rd. Early voting starts today. So, is it today? Is it? Yes, it started yesterday. Sorry about that. It started yesterday, but early voting continues, and then the primary day is August 23rd. Chol, good luck.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here.
Inspiration for the nation.